Hello, I'm Dr. Garrett Boyer, a clinical psychologist, and today I am visiting my friend John Norberg of Norberg Wealth Management. And John, you're no stranger to this channel. I think this is now our third recording that we've done together. So you're number one, and thank you for being with us here today and for welcoming me to your office. This is great.
It is a true pleasure, my friend, and honored to be here for now a third time. May it be the third of many yet to come.
Absolutely. So here we are, May 1st, the feast of St. Joseph the Worker. And look, there's one thing about the two of us. We're trying to put our best foot forward, trying to be hard workers, taking care of ourselves, taking care of our family. I thought it would be good to have a discussion about some things related to work. Look, I know you're an entrepreneur, so I want to hear a little bit about that experience. I want to talk some about what it means to work in order to provide for your family and your loved ones. And then I think it would be good to have a little discussion about work and life balance, because I notice that that's a real challenge for a lot of folks. So let's just start by getting to know you a little bit better, John, because we've had discussions before, but give us a little bit of background.
I would say just very briefly that I've always had a little bit of an entrepreneurial bent from the early days as far as mowing lawns and whatnot for my dad and getting paid for that. But started Norberg Wealth Management after working for another wealth management company nationwide about 18 months ago, maybe a little bit more than that by now. And it has been a lot of fun, but also one of the hardest things I've ever done. And I think that those who do take that leap know exactly what I'm talking about. But at the same time, any work, I believe, that has noble purpose behind it not only forms the soul, but helps us as men to become better men. And if we have that privilege, better husbands, better fathers as well.
Yeah, I like that. And it sounds like being an entrepreneur isn't anything new to you, but it also sounds like um, with what you have done recently, starting your own wealth management company, that's been a little bit different process, say, than mowing lawns when you were a kid. So can you kind of walk us through what, because you were working for a different organization, how did you discern that this was a step you wanted to take? And what kind of advice would you give to people who are thinking about making an adjustment in their career or making their work life look different? How do you go about thinking through what that should or could look like?
That is an excellent question. I think for each person, the path is going to look a little bit different, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I would liken it maybe to choosing a different job, right? A lot of us, have made career leaps in our lives. I mean, for instance, with you enrolling in the U.S. Army, that I'm sure was a huge leap of faith and a huge
Yeah.
risk in many ways too. But
Right.
you did it with a noble purpose in mind. Many noble purposes, I'm sure. And I think when you start a business, it's not totally dissimilar in that you're taking on the risk of the unknown, which for most human beings is one of those scariest things that we'll ever face, that which we do not know.
Absolutely.
I think ultimately that's maybe why we fear death. But that being
Mm-hmm.
said, I think jumping into that unknown, being willing to brave it even though you're afraid of it, is one of those elements of life that is going to help us move beyond what we are today to become what God is calling us to be.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I think that you've really highlighted something that people that I've worked with and that I myself have had to wrestle with, this idea of taking a bit of a leap, even though we may not know what the outcome is. We do have a fear around the things that we don't know because we like to be in control. And yet here you are now working in wealth management. If there's ever an industry where folks don't always probably feel like they've got all the control, I would think it would be that. How do you navigate some of those waters with your clients?
That is another fantastic question. And the short answer is there is a lot about being in the markets, being in an investment of any kind where you don't have control. I think that goes back to the risk, that unknown that we're just talking about. As human beings, we like that certitude, we like knowing. In terms of being able to manage that, I think the biggest thing is first understanding that we will never have complete control over anything. Even putting one foot in front of the other is a risk in some ways, right? We could step on a banana peel and fall flat on our face.
Absolutely, yeah.
But at the same time, recognizing that and being willing to move past it and to take that step anyway, I think that is not only one of the biggest and most important pieces, but also recognizing that we don't have to have control over everything. It's good to have a
Mm,
plan, follow that plan to the very best of our ability, keeping our eyes on the long term goal, and then just follow step by step. I think it was John Henry Newman, in fact, who once said, St. John Henry Newman, who said that I do not ask to see the distant scene, one step enough for me. So while you may have that
right.
long term vision, that long term goal, simply knowing what that next step is and then being able to bravely take it, that's what matters in the moment.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. That's a really great point to make, and very apt to bring in that quote from Cardinal Newman. And I think what we're talking about career. It could be so many things in life that we are uncertain of, or don't know all the details about, or have all the pieces of the puzzle in place before we have to start making some kind of move. But it kind of goes back to that fundamental. Sort of virtue of faith, and just having some faith and hope and some confidence that, well, this is going to work out. And if I need to adjust or pivot, I can and will. But here we go. We got to dive in. And I think that's a important lesson, certainly occupationally when we talk about careers and jobs, but with so many other things in life. Um, we know a lot of people. We're at that age ourselves where we've got kids. Do we know what it's going to look like when there's a new baby or a new member of the family? Not necessarily, but here we go. We're going to have to try and find out. So, to that point, then, taking care of a family, um, how has it been for you now being an entrepreneur? Just what are your reflections or thoughts about doing what you're doing for that purpose of providing for your family? Can you share a few ideas that you have about that?
Yeah, I and this is, I think, something that was first modeled for me by my own father,
Hmm.
and I'll bring him up again. Something as simple as being ready, willing, and able, and in fact, doing day after day, or in his case, night after night, because he took the night shift, to work hard to provide for a family at a job that, quite frankly, in his job, he was oftentimes dealing with the dregs of humanity. Just no two
Yeah.
ways about it. So to do that and to see him come home very tired day after day, and yet still have time and energy as much as he was able to not only be part of the family, but also be part of his community. One of the things that my dad also modeled for us kids was volunteering in the community. And that was something that he instilled in me. I don't get to as much as I'd like to, because, of course, family is such an important part of that work life balance. But all of this to say that by providing for us in that way, my father modeled for me how important that is to live
Hmm.
for my family, to be able to be there for them, to take care of them, to provide for them. And I think it's something that, if you go all the way back to the Garden of Eden, was placed on us as a burden, yes, but also, like many burdens, one which is noble to bear. And so I would consider it a privilege to be able to provide in this way for my family. And it's an even greater privilege, I think, that the Lord in His providence has given me uh, a little business of my own that I can do so with. So it's been a lot of fun, and it's been, I think, something that I just can't wait to see what it becomes.
Yeah, yeah, that's tremendous. And I think you've really highlighted something that is important to discuss. And I see this all the time in behavioral health is people trying to figure out how to navigate those avenues of doing your best at work and putting that best foot forward professionally, while at the same time being able to manage and provide yourself physically, emotionally, spiritually for your family at home. I'm sure you've seen it. I've certainly seen it. People who really invest themselves in their career at the expense of family members, at the expense of friends, loved ones, hobbies. And I've seen so often that really is a recipe for disaster. They may flourish occupationally and really be quote unquote successful professionally. But then, when relationships are fractured because of it, when you're estranged from friends and loved ones as a result of all of that, I've seen a lot of people look at themselves in the mirror and then have those hard conversations, wondering, well, what have I really gained? And so, yeah, work life balance. I don't know that I have the right answer. And I imagine there's a piece of it that we have to acknowledge it's going to vary from one person and one family to the next. But I'm interested to hear from you. What are your thoughts about self care, the balance of work and life, and just what do you do personally to try and make sure that that balance is weighed correctly?
Yeah. Um, awesome question, because that's, I think, something that any truly thoughtful father and husband or family man is going to ask themselves at least at one point, if not many points in their career, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And I've heard many different responses to this question myself, because I like to ask it as well of people who, like yourself, are obviously successful in their careers, building something that they can look back and be proud of, but also want to have a family who knows them, loves them, and respects them at the end of it, right?
yeah, yeah.
And on a philosophical level, I think that there is a point we have to realize there will never be any single moment in this life where we can just kick our feet up, on the proverbial desk and just say, well, that's it. I achieved work-life balance. Now I can coast easy.
Right.
And two, I'm reminded of an analogy I was given, actually secondhand, but it came from a Jesuit. And it is that you can compare work-life balance to a teeter-totter, right? The teeter-totter is, well, but all nigh impossible to stop right in the middle and then hold there. You might manage it for a few short seconds, but eventually one person or the other person tilts one way. And work-life
Mm,
balance is very similar,
hmm.
I think, where you're going to find, oh, I'm tilted a little bit too much towards work and the family is really suffering. I got to readjust. And then maybe on the other hand, perhaps, for both as fathers, we've taken some family leave to be with our
Right,
wives
right.
after childbirth.
Hmm.
And maybe after a good bit of family leave, we're feeling like, okay, well, maybe now's the time to get back into work, start ramping up again. On a practical level, for me, it means that I don't take more than 1 or 2 nights per week for late appointments or networking events or anything really that goes on after about 5 p.m.
Hmm.
And I also have a very hard and fast date night with my wife. She's
Huh,
the person who helped me start this family.
right.
And most important person on this planet in my life. It's important for me to take time for her. And 1 night per week, we usually do Tuesdays, unless there's something really big happening on a Tuesday, and then we find another day. But a once a week date night with my wife is absolutely non negotiable. So,
Wow.
practically speaking, those are a couple of ways I've found to try to help bring some balance between work, very important, puts bread on our table, and family, because that family life is what we do the work for.
Yeah, yeah, I love that, and I really like the idea of a date night. I think I'm going to steal that and do that with my wife. Now that I think about it, but
Please do.
I think you've highlighted a really important point, which is setting up some boundaries and some parameters. Because I think with a lot of people, regardless of what your job is or what kind of industry you're in, work can feel sometimes like a black hole that just sort of sucks you in, and there can be no escape if you allow it to be that way. Um, and that can look that way across so many different industries. Look, I work in the medical field as a behavioral health provider in a hospital. Primarily, you're doing financial kind of work, but I've seen folks who are doing like trades and like construction workers. Like some of these folks, they could work 24 hours a day if they wanted to. So I think it's important to, like you say, this is a rule in our family that this night, this time is reserved, because this is important to us. And so, whatever that means for you and your family, it's important to figure out. And I like that image you use of the teeter totter, because I think you're right. It is this sort of thing that's very constantly in flux. But the other thing about a teeter totter is that it's no fun to do a teeter totter with just yourself. And when we're talking about work life balance, so many times, um, it's not just you trying to balance your own life out. You're trying to figure it out with a spouse, a significant other, a family member, family members, friends, whatever. And I think it's important to be open to listening to what the needs of others under your roof are and having that dialogue and those important conversations. um, but yeah, if there's one thing I've observed, it is work-life balance getting a little bit out of whack and then causing personal and professional problems for folks. You know, as I hear you visit, and I've heard you talk about some of the work you've done with clients before, it strikes me that maybe behavioral health and financial planning aren't so different in how we work with folks. So I'm interested to know, people working with money and trying to plan for themselves financially. I imagine you experience other people's anxiety, uncertainty, that kind of thing as well. How do you help them have some peace of mind, especially with the way things are right now?
That's a really great question too, because right now, I mean, May 2025, markets are having some pretty good sized volatility at the moment.
Of course.
There's a lot of uncertainty out there. And again, the unknown, the uncertain, we as humans just revile that. We don't like being in uncertainty. So I think, from a psychological standpoint, one of the most important things that as a good financial advisor, I try to do is to try to find out what's that greatest fear that they are facing. Is it in fact just the uncertainty? And I met with a client the other day, via Zoom, where it was, I think, just the pure uncertainty of what's going to happen. Am I going to have to work longer to live the retirement that I want? And has this blown up my plans?
Wow.
I think from a behavioral health standpoint, knowing that that other person has the same fears, worries, hopes, dreams, and goals that any of us does, right? We want to obviously avoid pain and seek pleasure, but it's deeper than that. We want to be there for the people who matter for us. Mm-hmm. And that means having time back in terms of being able to have good work-life balance, retire on time, etc. But also we want to set aside a certain nest egg so that when the time comes, we can be not just good parents, but eventually good grandparents and maybe even great-grandparents. And that means that the markets in some way have to ideally cooperate, or that we have to have a plan. And in times of volatility, it's so easy. And I've even experienced some of these same fears and uncertainties myself, because I'm human too.
Right.
It's so easy to say, well, chuck the plan. Things are different this time. But there's a saying in my industry that the most famous last words any trader ever uttered are, "This time it's different." The fact is that it's like a wheel on a bike, right? It goes up and it goes down. But as long as you don't jump up off that bike in the middle of your downhill path, but you stay on it and you keep pedaling, and those bike wheels go up and go down, and you just keep going forward. You're going to keep making progress as long as you keep going forward despite the ups and the downs, right? So to meet a person where they're at, be able to somehow communicate to them that this is nothing new, we've been here before, we're going to be okay. That, I think, is reaching the person themselves. I know that's a really wandering answer, but to be able to meet the person where they're at, reach where they're feeling the most fear, and then communicate to them that it's going to be okay as long as we stick to the plan that we've made. Obviously they might make some tweaks, some adjustments, life does happen, but to stay the course and not allow fear to rule the day. That, I think, is one of the greatest and at the same time hardest parts of my job, because in uncertainty, we all have great fear.
Yeah. Well, that's tremendous. So, listen, John, if people want to take some control of their financial future, if they want to work with you, how do they find you?
That's a great question. We will post a link in the description to this video to our contact form. Drop us a line. And in the meantime, shameless self-plug for my interviewer here, go ahead and like and subscribe, because solid content I've seen coming from your channel, and I just want to see you continue to grow the audience that you speak to, because I have really enjoyed seeing you speak to people about so many different topics of behavioral health. So please keep up the great work.
Yeah, absolutely. So look, this is what the two of us do. This is what so many people everywhere do. We work. We work because there is something noble about it. There's something that is just, it tugs at an intrinsic part of who we are as human beings. And so on this feast of St. Joseph the Worker, it's great that we could spend a few minutes talking about this, reflecting on it. And there's nobody that would have rather shared a conversation about this with than you, John. So thank you so much.
Thank you, my friend.
And we'll see you all next time. I'm Dr. Garrett Boyer. This is John Norberg. Take care.